Emily stood frozen at the entrance of the church, her heart racing. She faced a man she never expected to see again, the stranger she once helped in her darkest days. But as he stepped forward, what he revealed would turn her world upside down. Just moments before she was to say, "I do."
Hey there. Welcome to True Tales Authentic Emotions. I'm Emma Blake. Get ready for another fascinating story. Enjoy.
Emily's heart pounded as she stood in the dimly lit bridal room, surrounded by mirrors reflecting her own anxious expression. The white lace of her wedding dress felt heavy, not from its weight, but from the burden of uncertainty that suddenly clouded her mind. The soft hum of distant wedding preparations faded into the background as her thoughts raced. She had dreamt of this day for years, but now, standing on the brink of a new life, doubt crept in like a shadow she couldn't shake. The door creaked open, and a bridesmaid stepped in, her face pale. "Emily, there's someone at the church door asking for you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, thick with tension. Emily's stomach twisted in knots as she struggled to make sense of this unexpected interruption. Who could possibly want to see her now? She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the unease only grew stronger. As Emily reached the church entrance, her steps faltered. Standing before her was a man she recognized instantly, though she hadn't seen him in years. His appearance was drastically different from the last time they met, yet his eyes held the same depth, the same weight of untold stories. She had met him during one of the darkest periods of her life, a time she had almost forgotten, or tried to. Now, here he was, at the threshold of the happiest day of her life, and the look on his face told her that everything was about to change. The man stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with an intensity that sent shivers down Emily's spine. "I'm sorry to interrupt your day," he began, "but there's something you need to know before you take this next step." His words hung in the air, each one like a stone dropping into the still water of Emily's carefully planned future. She felt her world tilt, as if the ground beneath her was suddenly uncertain. The truth he was about to reveal would turn everything she knew upside down, and there was no turning back. Years before her wedding day, Emily's life was starkly different. She lived in a small, cramped apartment that barely kept out the cold. The weight of financial struggles was a constant burden, etched into her tired eyes and the faint lines on her young face. Her light brown hair, once full of life, now seemed to mirror the exhaustion that clung to her. Every day was a battle to make ends meet, yet beneath the weariness, there was a resilience that refused to be extinguished. One day, as Emily walked home from her part-time job, she noticed a man sitting on the sidewalk, his clothes worn and his face lined with hardship. Despite her own struggles, she felt a deep compassion for him. She knew what it was like to feel lost and desperate. Without hesitating, she reached into her bag and pulled out her last dollar. It wasn't much, but it was all she had, and she offered it to him with a gentle smile, hoping it could bring him some comfort, even if just for a moment. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she couldn't shake the image of the man's grateful eyes from her mind. She stared at the ceiling, dreaming of a future where she wouldn't have to choose between helping someone and feeding herself. She longed for a life where she could be happy and secure, where she could marry the man of her dreams without the shadows of poverty hanging over her. Her heart was full of hope, even as reality pressed down on her. Years passed, and Emily's life slowly began to change. She met Mark, a kind-hearted man with a strong sense of responsibility and warmth that immediately drew her in. For Emily, Mark represented the stability and love she had longed for during her difficult years. His deep brown eyes and calm demeanor gave her a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. As they grew closer, she began to see a future with him, one that was far brighter than she had ever imagined. With Mark by her side, Emily dared to dream of a better life. They started planning their wedding, a symbol of the new beginning they both craved. Every detail was discussed with excitement and anticipation, from the flowers to the venue. Despite their limited budget, they were determined to make it a day to remember. Emily's determination, combined with Mark's unwavering support, made her believe that this time, things would finally go right. However, as the wedding day approached, small problems began to surface. A supplier backed out at the last minute, and there were issues with the guest list. But each time a challenge arose, Mark was there, helping Emily to find quick solutions. His calmness under pressure reassured her that they could overcome anything together. Emily's past struggles had taught her resilience, and with Mark's help, she felt ready to face whatever obstacles might come their way. As the wedding preparations continued, Emily began to feel the familiar weight of financial strain pressing down on her once again. Despite their best efforts, unexpected expenses kept cropping up. The budget they had so carefully planned was starting to stretch thin. One evening, Emily sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and receipts, her forehead creased with worry. The dream wedding she had envisioned seemed to be slipping out of reach. She knew they couldn't afford any more surprises, but she couldn't shake the feeling that more challenges were on the horizon. Just as Emily feared, one of the major service providers for the wedding called to cancel their contract. The florist, who was supposed to supply all the flowers for the ceremony and reception, backed out at the last minute. Emily's heart sank as she listened to the voicemail. She felt the pressure mounting, the weight of making everything perfect with limited resources bearing down on her. The cancellation was a blow, but she knew she had to find a way to fix it. With determination in her eyes, she began making calls, trying to find a replacement, her mind racing with a mixture of anxiety and resolve. As the wedding day drew closer, Emily began to sense a shift in Mark's family. What had once been excitement for the upcoming nuptials slowly turned into concern. During a family dinner, Mark's mother hesitantly brought up the topic of finances, her voice soft but firm. "Are you sure this is the right time to get married, with all the financial pressures?" she asked, her eyes searching Emily's face for reassurance. Emily felt her stomach tighten. The question, though politely phrased, stung deeply. It wasn't just about money. It was about her ability to provide a stable future for their marriage. The unspoken doubts hung in the air, and Emily realized that she had to prove herself, not just to Mark, but to his entire family. The pressure of expectations weighed heavily on Emily as she tried to balance the wedding preparations with the growing financial concerns. She spent sleepless nights going over every detail, determined to make the wedding perfect despite the mounting obstacles. But the stress was taking its toll. One evening, as she sat alone, staring at a checklist, she felt the overwhelming need to succeed pressing down on her. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped a pen, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She couldn't afford to let anyone down, least of all herself. Just as Emily and Mark thought they were beginning to manage the wedding expenses, disaster struck. Mark had made some investments in the hope of increasing their savings, but the market turned against him. In a matter of days, they lost a significant portion of the money they had set aside for the wedding. Mark's face was pale as he broke the news to Emily. She could see the regret and frustration in his deep brown eyes, but there was nothing they could do to recover the lost funds. The dream wedding they had planned seemed to be slipping further out of reach, and Emily felt a cold wave of panic wash over her. Determined not to let this setback ruin their plans, Emily took matters into her own hands. Without telling Mark, she began selling some of her personal belongings to make up for the lost money. Jewelry, furniture, anything she could part with, she sold quietly. But the strain of keeping this secret weighed heavily on her. One evening, she sat alone in their bedroom, staring at the empty spaces where her possessions used to be. The financial stress was beginning to seep into their relationship, and Emily feared that the pressure might soon be too much for them to bear. Just when Emily and Mark were struggling to keep everything together, an old friend of Mark's, someone he hadn't seen in years, reappeared in his life. This friend, who had once been close to Mark, now approached him with a mixture of concern and arrogance. They met for coffee, and as the conversation unfolded, the friend began to question Mark's choices, particularly his decision to marry Emily. "Are you sure she's the right one for you?" he asked, leaning in with a serious expression. "I mean, with everything going on, maybe she's more of a burden than a blessing. You might want to reconsider before it's too late." These words hit Mark hard, planting seeds of doubt that he didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't ignore. Emily, returning home earlier than expected, overheard part of the conversation from the hallway. The words she heard felt like a punch to the gut. She stood frozen, her heart racing, as she realized that the friend was questioning not just the wedding, but her place in Mark's life. Doubt began to creep into her mind, overshadowing all the love and support she had felt from Mark. Was she really holding him back? The confidence she had been building up shattered in an instant, leaving her feeling more uncertain than ever. The doubts that had been planted in Emily's mind began to grow, gnawing away at her confidence. She sat alone in the living room, staring blankly at the engagement ring on her finger. Was she really deserving of the happiness she was chasing? The weight of the sacrifices she had made, and the pressure to keep everything together, began to feel unbearable. She couldn't help but reflect on the decisions that had brought her here, including the dollar she had given to the man so many years ago. Had that simple act of kindness led her to this point? Or was it just another mistake in a series of misguided choices? As these thoughts swirled in her mind, Emily found herself pulling away from Mark, both physically and emotionally. She feared that if he discovered the extent of her struggles, it would only confirm the doubts that others had planted. Each time he tried to talk to her, she distanced herself, creating an invisible barrier between them. She began to avoid eye contact, her once bright eyes now clouded with insecurity and fear. Emily was trapped in a spiral of self-doubt, unable to see a way out, and terrified that her fears would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Just as Emily was beginning to feel completely overwhelmed, a voice from her past re-emerged. It was Sarah, an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. They had drifted apart as life took them in different directions, but Sarah had heard about Emily's upcoming wedding and reached out unexpectedly. Sarah, with her bright blue eyes and infectious smile, was a welcome distraction from Emily's worries. She offered to help with the wedding, insisting that it was the least she could do for an old friend. Emily felt a glimmer of hope, thinking that perhaps with Sarah's help, she could pull everything together. However, it soon became clear that Sarah was struggling with her own challenges. She had recently gone through a difficult divorce and was facing financial issues herself. Despite her good intentions, Sarah's presence began to complicate matters. The solution she proposed, cutting costs by taking on more of the work themselves, seemed promising at first, but it only added to the tension. Mark was concerned about the added stress on Emily and the potential for things to go wrong. The strain between them grew as they tried to balance Sarah's well-meaning, but ultimately problematic assistance with their own mounting pressures. After much discussion and a few tears, Emily and Sarah decided to take control of the situation by reorganizing the wedding plans. They sat down together, surrounded by notes and plans, and began to reimagine the wedding on a more modest scale. They found a beautiful but more affordable venue that seemed perfect for a simpler, yet elegant celebration. Emily felt a renewed sense of hope as they mapped out this new plan. It wasn't what she originally envisioned, but it felt like a fresh start, a way to make the best out of a difficult situation. As the new plans started to take shape, a cautious optimism filled the air. Emily and Sarah worked tirelessly, adjusting details and cutting unnecessary expenses. But beneath the surface, there was still an undercurrent of tension. Mark noticed the changes and the increased involvement of Sarah, and while he appreciated the effort, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were becoming too complicated. The tension between his desire to support Emily and his concern about the new direction they were heading in began to grow, casting a subtle shadow over the renewed plans. Just as Emily and Sarah began to feel hopeful about the wedding plans, disaster struck. A few days before the wedding, they received news that the new venue had suffered a significant structural issue, making it unsafe for the event. Emily's heart sank as she read the email, her hands trembling. This wasn't just a minor setback, it was a crushing blow. The weight of everything that had gone wrong pressed down on her, and for the first time, she started to believe that maybe this wedding wasn't meant to be. Mark, already stressed by the financial strain and the mounting pressures, was losing his patience. He stood in the kitchen, frustration etched across his face as he tried to process the latest setback. His voice, usually calm and reassuring, now held a sharp edge as he questioned why everything seemed to be going wrong. Emily, seeing the tension between them grow, felt her resolve beginning to crack. The situation had reached a boiling point, and it was clear that something had to give. The day before the wedding, disaster struck once again. Emily received a call from the florist, who informed her that they were canceling the service due to a misunderstanding with the payment. Emily's face went pale as she listened to the florist's explanation, her grip tightening around the phone. This was the final straw. After everything they had already been through, it felt like the universe was conspiring against her. The weight of the disappointment was unbearable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this was all her fault. Later that evening, Emily and Mark had a heated argument in their living room. Mark, frustrated and exhausted, questioned why everything seemed to be falling apart. Emily, feeling isolated in her struggles, lashed out, accusing him of not understanding the burden she was carrying. The argument escalated, and Emily's voice trembled with emotion as she suggested that maybe they should just cancel the wedding. Her words hung in the air, heavy with doubt and sorrow, as Mark stared at her, stunned by the gravity of the situation. After the argument with Mark, Emily retreats to a small, dimly lit bedroom. She sits on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands as tears stream down her cheeks. The room is sparsely furnished, with only the bare essentials, reflecting the simplicity of her life. The isolation and darkness of the room mirror her inner turmoil as she reflects on how everything has gone wrong. Her mind races, questioning every decision she has made up to this point, and she wonders if she is truly deserving of the happiness she sought. Emily's thoughts drift back to the day she gave her last dollar to the homeless man. She begins to question whether that small act of kindness really made any difference. The memory of the man's grateful smile only deepens her despair as she feels the weight of her current situation pressing down on her. The tension within her grows unbearable, and she starts to believe that there might be no way out of this downward spiral. The hope she once clung to now feels distant, almost unreachable, as she contemplates whether all her efforts have been in vain. As Emily searches through a drawer in the dimly lit room, she stumbles upon a folded piece of paper tucked away between some old documents. Curiosity piqued, she slowly opens it, revealing Mark's handwriting. The letter is heartfelt, filled with raw emotions as Mark expresses his fears and insecurities about their upcoming marriage. Emily's expression shifts from curiosity to a mix of shock and sadness as she reads each word, realizing that Mark had been harboring doubts just like she had, but chose to keep them hidden. The discovery is both enlightening and troubling, stirring a whirlwind of emotions within her. With the letter still in her hand, Emily sits down heavily on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. The room feels even smaller now as the weight of this new revelation presses down on her. She feels a flicker of hope knowing that Mark shared her fears, yet it's overshadowed by a deep sense of betrayal. The fact that he hid this from her only adds to the tension between them, and Emily is left wondering what else he might be keeping from her. The room is quiet, but the atmosphere is thick with unresolved emotions and the unspoken words that linger in the air. After the emotional storm from discovering Mark's letter, Emily feels a renewed determination to save her relationship and the wedding. She stands in the living room, phone in hand, reaching out to friends and family who had once offered help. With each call, her resolve strengthens, and she begins to piece together a new plan, drawing on the support of those who care about her. The room, which once felt suffocating, now seems filled with the energy of a fresh start. Emily's expression is one of quiet strength and resolve, as she decides to confront the challenges head-on. As the days pass, Emily reconnects with people who had been distant for a while. She meets with an old friend in a cozy cafe, their conversation warm and filled with genuine care. The friend reassures her, offering both emotional support and practical solutions. Emily listens intently, her face softening as she feels the weight of her burdens begin to lift slightly. The atmosphere in the cafe is light and comforting, a stark contrast to the tension she had been feeling at home. With renewed hope, Emily starts to believe that they might actually pull off the wedding after all. On the morning of the wedding, Emily begins to notice the subtle but growing unease among her closest friends and family. As she adjusts her dress, she overhears whispers of doubt from a group of bridesmaids in the hallway. Their hesitant tones and worried expressions tell her that they're not as confident in this union as she had hoped. The sense of isolation starts to creep in, and Emily feels a sinking feeling in her chest. The warmth of the day seems to be overshadowed by the cold reality that those she trusted most might not fully support her decision. As the ceremony draws nearer, Emily's nerves are further frayed by Mark's distant behavior. He seems preoccupied, avoiding eye contact and barely engaging in conversation. During a brief moment alone with him, Emily tries to reach out, but Mark's distracted responses only deepen her sense of abandonment. The emotional distance between them feels insurmountable, and Emily is left wondering if she is truly alone in this battle. The once hopeful atmosphere of the day now feels heavy with unspoken fears and doubts. In the quiet, dimly lit church, Emily finds herself alone, sitting in one of the pews. The silence is almost deafening, amplifying the weight of the decisions she must make. As she gazes at the altar, she feels the overwhelming urge to flee, to cancel the wedding and spare everyone further pain. The flickering candles cast long shadows, mirroring her doubts and fears. She wonders if she's making the right choice, or if this path is destined to lead to more heartache. Every breath feels heavy, as if the very air in the room is thick with uncertainty. Just as Emily is about to give in to her despair, an elderly man, whom she hadn't noticed before, slowly approaches. His presence is gentle yet commanding, and without saying a word, he sits beside her. There's something in his calm demeanor that soothes her frayed nerves, though he doesn't speak at first. When he finally does, his words are simple, yet they strike a chord deep within her. His unexpected kindness and wisdom make her pause, reconsidering the decision she was about to make. But even with this moment of clarity, Emily remains torn, uncertain if she has the strength to go through with the wedding. As Emily sits in the church, memories begin to flood back, small, seemingly insignificant moments that now take on a new meaning. She recalls the many times she offered a kind word or a helping hand, and how these acts, though small, always seem to come back to her in unexpected ways. In her mind's eye, she sees flashes of the past. Each time she gave something of herself, there was always a familiar figure nearby. The old man, the one who seemed so ordinary, had appeared in the background of her life more times than she had ever realized. The memories intensify as she remembers the times she had seen him, always at the periphery of her life, observing with a quiet intensity. Whether it was a brief glance in a crowded street or a fleeting presence at a moment of hardship, the realization dawns on Emily that this man had been silently watching over her, perhaps guiding her in ways she never understood. Yet, despite this revelation, the weight of her current situation presses down on her, and she remains uncertain if these connections mean anything significant or if they are just coincidences strung together by her desperation to find meaning. Emily stood in the small room just off the main hall where the wedding ceremony was about to begin. The weight of the day, of all the decisions and doubts that had piled up over time, felt like it was crushing her from the inside. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she looked at her reflection in the mirror, dressed in white but feeling anything but pure. She felt trapped, unable to go forward yet too afraid to back out now. It was then that her best friend walked in, noticing the tension in Emily's face. Emily broke down, confessing her fears, her overwhelming sense that this marriage might be a mistake. The words spilled out as she admitted that she no longer saw a way forward, and the thought of walking down the aisle felt impossible. The minutes ticked by, each one heightening the tension in the air. Emily's best friend, usually so full of reassuring words, was now silent, the weight of Emily's confession hanging between them. The door to the chapel remained closed, but the muffled sounds of guests arriving filtered through, adding to the pressure. Emily's hands trembled as she clung to her friend's hand, desperate for some clarity, some sign that she wasn't about to make the biggest mistake of her life. As the final moments approached, the tension reached its peak, and Emily was on the verge of deciding to call everything off, unable to bear the thought of moving forward into something that felt so wrong. Emily stood at the altar, her heart heavy with the decision she was about to announce. She could feel every eye on her, waiting, expecting. The words she had rehearsed in her mind were on the verge of spilling out when, suddenly, the large wooden doors at the back of the chapel creaked open. The soft murmur of the guests quieted as a well-dressed man entered, his presence commanding attention. He walked with purpose, his gaze fixed on Emily. She blinked, recognizing him. This was the man she had given $1 to so long ago. He was no longer the disheveled figure she remembered, but a man transformed, his eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and resolve. As he reached the front of the chapel, he asked to speak, his voice calm yet filled with a depth that immediately captivated everyone present. He began by sharing his story, recounting the moment when Emily's small act of kindness had changed his life. That single dollar had sparked a series of events that led him to rebuild his life, create a successful business, and establish a network of support for others who had fallen on hard times. He spoke of the many lives that had been touched by this network, including Mark's, who had received help during a time of great need. Emily listened in awe, tears welling up as she realized the profound impact her seemingly insignificant gesture had had on the world. The man then turned to Emily, his expression warm and encouraging. He explained how her kindness had not only transformed his life, but had also set into motion events that made this very moment possible. The struggles she and Mark had faced, the support they had unknowingly received, all of it was connected to that single act of generosity. The weight of her decision seemed to lift as she understood that her actions, even in the darkest times, had created ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. Overwhelmed with emotion, Emily found the strength to embrace her future with Mark, knowing that their love and perseverance had been guided by something much greater than either of them could have foreseen. Emily felt a surge of emotion as she stood at the altar, her heart now filled with renewed strength and purpose. The weight of all the doubts and struggles that had burdened her melted away in that moment. She glanced at Mark, and their eyes met with a deep understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had traveled together. The revelation about the man who had once been a stranger, whose life had been transformed by a single act of kindness, had changed everything. It had illuminated the power of even the smallest gestures and how they could ripple through time, affecting countless lives in ways she had never imagined. With her heart full of gratitude and love, Emily knew she was making the right decision. The challenges they had faced, the obstacles that had seemed insurmountable, had only served to strengthen the bond they shared. The vows they were about to exchange took on a new meaning, not just as promises to one another, but as a testament to their resilience and the unbreakable connection that had been forged through adversity. As she and Mark exchanged their vows, there was a profound sense of joy in the room. Their words were not just spoken. They were felt deeply by everyone present, resonating with the truth that had been revealed. The ceremony concluded with a sense of triumph, not just for Emily and Mark, but for everyone who had witnessed their journey. The love that had brought them to this moment was now stronger than ever, unshakable and true. Years passed, and Emily and Mark's life together flourished. They built a home filled with warmth and laughter, surrounded by family and friends who had supported them through it all. The small act of kindness that had once seemed so insignificant had blossomed into something far greater. It had led to a life of happiness, fulfillment, and purpose, as Emily and Mark continued to pay that kindness forward, helping others just as they had been helped. Looking back on their journey, Emily could see how every challenge, every moment of doubt, had played a part in bringing them to this place. The life they had built together was a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of hope. Emily knew that the strength they had found in each other, and the kindness they had shared with the world, would continue to guide them for the rest of their days.